Peppa Pig, the other George. The morning started strangely. Peppa woke up in her bed. Sunlight slipped through the curtains. Everything seemed normal, but the house was filled with an unnatural silence, the kind you feel before you understand it's wrong. She looked at George's bed, empty. Peppa went downstairs. The kitchen was silent. Cups were on the table, but no steam rose from them. The ladle was resting by the stove. No footsteps, no voices. George? Mummy? Daddy? No one answered. She began climbing the stairs again, and then heard a creak from the bedroom. Her heart started beating faster. The door was slightly open. Peppa peeked in and froze. George was lying in bed, blanket neat. He was sleeping, deeply, the dinosaur toy beside him. His chest rose and fell. His face looked peaceful, eyes shut. Peppa stepped closer. "George," she whispered. He didn't respond. "Peppa?" A voice? She turned. George stood in the doorway. Also George, awake, real, staring at her with wide, frightened eyes. "Who is that?" she breathed. He didn't answer, just stared at himself, asleep in the bed. The one in bed began to move, sat up slowly, head tilted slightly to one side. A smile began to stretch across his face, too wide, too long, without blinking, eyes open, far too open. "Who are you?" Peppa shouted. That's George, but it's not him." The sitting George lifted his head. "I woke up," he said. The voice was correct, but somehow misaligned, like a recording slightly out of pitch. The real George took a step back. "He's smiling," he whispered. "He isn't blinking." Peppa grabbed her brother's hoof. They ran. On the walls, photographs, Peppa and George. But now on every photo, two George, one familiar, one slightly taller, always smiling. Downstairs the windows were dimmed. The house felt tighter. The hallway stretched unnaturally long. Crumbs on the floor Peppa didn't remember. Doors now led to strange rooms. A bathroom without mirrors. A living room with 3 sofas, when there had only ever been one. They locked themselves in the closet. Peppa was trembling. "Say something," she whispered. I don't know who he is," George said. "But I'm real. I remember when you taught me to draw the sun with little rays, and he just lies there and smiles." Peppa nodded. "I know," she whispered. "It's you, the other one." He wasn't breathing. Silence. Then footsteps, light, precise, even. He was behind the door. They could feel him. He didn't knock, didn't speak, he just waited. A shadow appeared under the door, small. Hooves. He crouched, peered through the gap. Too long. Then a voice, software flat, like it was being played back. "Peppa, open the door. We're the same." They escaped through the back, but outside, the street was empty, all the houses shut, the windows fogged, and in every reflection, a shape that looked like George. That evening, Peppa lay in bed, George beside her. They held hooves. You're really you, right?" she asked. George looked at her, smiled, silently, too long, without blinking. Since then, there are 2 George in the house. One plays with her, the other stands in the hallway, sometimes by the mirror, sometimes in the bed. Both of them smile. Peppa is afraid to fall asleep, afraid to wake up, afraid she won't notice when they switch places. Because one night, one of them leaned toward her ear and whispered, "He's sleeping. You chose wrong."
Scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. It was Peppa's birthday, and everyone in the family was excited to celebrate. But when Peppa woke up that morning, she noticed something strange about her birthday cards. Each one showed the same date, but the year kept changing backwards. First it was last year, then 2 years ago, then 5 years ago, as if time itself was moving in reverse. Downstairs, the birthday decorations were already up, but they looked faded and old, as if they had been hanging there for decades. The balloons were deflated and gray, and the streamers hung limply from the ceiling like cobwebs. Mummy Pig was in the kitchen preparing the birthday cake, but when Peppa looked closer, she saw that the candles were already melted down to nothing. "Happy birthday, Peppa," said Daddy Pig, but his voice sounded distant and echoing, as if he was speaking from very far away. When Peppa turned to look at him, she noticed that he appeared slightly transparent, like a ghost. George was sitting at the table, but he wasn't moving at all, just staring ahead with a blank expression. The birthday party guests began to arrive, but something was terribly wrong with each of them. Susie Sheep came first, but her wool was completely white, and she moved in slow motion. Pedro Pony arrived next, but he was walking backwards, as if the film of his life was being played in reverse. When it came time to blow out the candles, Peppa discovered that no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't make them go out. Instead, the flames grew bigger and bigger, casting strange shadows on the walls that moved independently of the people in the room. The shadows seemed to be acting out a different party entirely, one where everyone was crying instead of celebrating. As the party continued, Peppa realized that her friends were repeating the same conversations over and over again. "Happy birthday, Peppa," they would say, then pause for exactly 10 seconds, then say it again. Their movements became more and more mechanical, like wind-up toys that were slowly running down. The birthday cake was brought out, but when Peppa looked at it closely, she saw that it was covered in dust and the frosting had turned gray. When Peppa tried to cut the cake, the knife went right through it as if it wasn't really there. The cake was just an illusion, a memory of birthdays past. The guests began to leave one by one, but instead of walking out the door, they simply faded away like morning mist. First Pedro disappeared, then Susie, then all the others until only Peppa and her family remained. But even they were becoming less solid, less real with each passing moment. Peppa ran to the window to look outside, but instead of the familiar garden, she saw an endless gray void. There were no trees, no grass, no sky, just emptiness stretching on forever. She realized that she wasn't in her real house anymore, but trapped in some kind of memory or dream of a birthday that had never actually happened. As the last of the decorations faded away and the room became completely empty, Peppa heard a voice whisper, "Every birthday is the same birthday, Peppa. You can never grow older here." She looked in the mirror and saw that she looked exactly the same as she always had, and she understood that in this place, she would remain forever young, forever celebrating the same birthday that would never end.
A lost Peppa Pig episode that never aired on TV. Evening descended upon Peppa Pig's house, bringing with it an unusually strong wind. It howled in the chimneys, rattled the shutters, and rustled the leaves of the trees outside the window. Peppa and George were already in their beds, but they couldn't sleep. The wind sounded different than usual. In its howls, strange, almost melodic notes could be heard, and sometimes it seemed to whisper. Peppa listened intently. The whisper became clearer and clearer. It called her name. A quiet, drawn-out voice that seemed to penetrate through the walls. George, lying nearby, stirred. He heard it too. His small eyes were wide open, staring into the darkness, trying to understand where the sound was coming from. The whisper began to tell a story about the wind that was once something else, something that lived in the air but had no form, something that was looking for a home. And now it had found it. The whisper grew closer, as if the wind was entering the room. A cold, invisible current of air touched Peppa's face. She felt her hair stand on end. From outside the window, through the cracks in the frame, thin, almost transparent threads began to seep in. They looked like cobwebs, but moved with incredible speed, writhing and intertwining. The threads slowly stretched towards George. He tried to turn away, but the threads had already enveloped him. They were cold and sticky, like mist, yet strong as steel. The threads began to pull George towards the window. He couldn't resist. His body slowly lifted above the bed, as if an invisible force was pulling him. From outside the window, a quiet but triumphant sigh of the wind was heard. George disappeared out the window, dissolving into the darkness and the howling wind. The threads vanished with him. The wind died down. The room fell silent. Peppa lay there, her heart pounding. She had seen George disappear. She knew he was gone forever. She slowly got out of bed and went to the window. Beyond it was only darkness and the rustling of leaves. But Peppa knew the wind had changed. It had taken George. When Mummy Pig and Daddy Pig came in the morning, they saw Peppa sitting by the window. She was pale and silent. They asked where George was, but Peppa couldn't answer. She just stared at the window, which now seemed so innocent. Her parents decided George had simply run off to play with friends, and Peppa was too tired to speak. Since then, Peppa never opens the windows in her room. She is afraid of the wind, and sometimes, in the silence of the night, she hears a quiet whisper coming from outside the window. It's the mysterious whisper of the wind. It waits for someone to forget it, waits for someone to open the window again, because the mysterious whisper of the wind never stops. It just waits for someone to forget it.
Scary Peppa Pig episode that never made it on TV. It was a perfectly ordinary morning when Peppa woke up in her bedroom, but something felt different. The sunlight streaming through her window seemed dimmer than usual, casting strange shadows across her pink walls. As she got dressed in her favorite red dress, she noticed her reflection in the mirror was smiling even when she wasn't. Downstairs, Mummy Pig was making breakfast, but her usual cheerful humming had been replaced by an eerie silence. When Peppa entered the kitchen, Mummy Pig turned around with a smile that stretched too wide across her face, revealing teeth that seemed sharper than before. "Good morning, Peppa," she said in a voice that sounded hollow and distant. George was already at the breakfast table, but he wasn't playing with his toy dinosaur as usual. Instead, he sat perfectly still, staring at his cereal bowl with eyes that had turned completely black. When Peppa tried to talk to him, he slowly turned his head toward her, and his mouth opened to reveal the same unnaturally sharp teeth as Mummy Pig. Daddy Pig came down the stairs, but his footsteps sounded different, heavier, more deliberate. His glasses reflected no light, and behind them, his eyes were just empty dark holes. "Time for school, Peppa," he announced, but his voice echoed as if coming from somewhere far away. The walk to school felt longer than usual. The familiar houses along the way looked the same, but all the windows were dark, and no other families were outside. The playground equipment stood motionless in the still air, and even the birds had stopped singing. When they reached the school, all of Peppa's friends were already there, standing in a perfect line. Susie Sheep, Rebecca Rabbit, Pedro Pony, and all the others turned to look at Peppa simultaneously. Their eyes had the same black emptiness as George's, and their smiles revealed rows of sharp, gleaming teeth. "We've been waiting for you, Peppa," they said in unison, their voices creating a disturbing harmony. Inside the classroom, Madame Gazelle was writing on the blackboard, but the words kept changing every time Peppa looked away. The lesson seemed to go on forever, and whenever Peppa tried to look out the window, she saw only darkness, as if the world outside had simply disappeared. During playtime, the children gathered around Peppa in a circle. They began to chant something in a language she didn't understand, and with each word, their eyes grew darker and their smiles grew wider. The playground began to spin around her, faster and faster, until everything became a blur of twisted faces and sharp teeth. When Peppa finally made it home, the house looked exactly the same from the outside, but when she opened the front door, she found herself back in the classroom. No matter which door she tried, she always ended up in the same place, surrounded by the same circle of friends with their black eyes and sharp smiles, chanting words that made her feel cold and afraid. The chanting grew louder and louder until it was all Peppa could hear, and she realized that she was beginning to smile the same wide, sharp smile as everyone else. Her reflection in the classroom window showed her own eyes turning black, and she understood that she would never leave this place, never escape the endless circle of friends who had been waiting for her all along.
Peppa Pig, the painted goat. That day, Daddy Pig decided to tidy up the attic. Peppa and George came along. They loved rummaging through boxes, discovering old toys and books. Among piles of dusty folders, Peppa noticed something strange. A sheet of paper nailed to a wooden board. On it was a goat, painted in black ink, very precisely drawn with long horns, a stretched-out body, and completely black eyes. No reflection, no expression. "Who drew this?" asked Peppa. Daddy shrugged. "No idea. Probably left by the previous residents." I don't like the way he looks at me, George whispered. Daddy wanted to throw the drawing away, but Peppa said, let's keep it. For some reason, she didn't want to let it go, so they placed it against the hallway wall near the stairs. That night, Peppa woke up, not from a sound, from a feeling, as if someone was watching her. She got up and peeked into the hallway. The goat in the picture was different. Now its mouth was open, black, like its eyes, deep, as if there was no bottom inside. Peppa blinked, looked again. Yes, the mouth was open. George, wake up! Huh? Look! But when George came to see, the picture was back to normal. Silent, closed, with its mouth shut again. The next morning, Daddy Pig looked puzzled. Did someone move the picture? It's standing differently. No, said Peppa. But she knew. No one had touched it. It had moved by itself. Closer to the stairs now. Just a little, but definitely closer. On the second day, the mouth was wider, the corners stretched out, and one eye looked shinier, almost like it was glistening. Mummy Pig tried to take the board out to the shed, but couldn't lift it, even though it used to be light. What nonsense, she muttered. I must be tired. On the third night, Peppa woke again. A creak came from downstairs. She stepped into the hallway. The drawing was gone. The board now stood right by the front door, turned directly toward her, as if he had moved himself. And the mouth, it had changed again, pulled sideways into a crooked grin, and the eyes were looking up, exactly where Peppa was standing. This is a dream, she whispered. But the soft sound of footsteps wouldn't let her sleep until morning. Now the drawing is kept in the closet. The door is always shut. But at night, you can hear the board shifting, scraping, rustling. One day, Daddy Pig found the picture standing by the door again. No one had opened the closet. A crack now runs through the board, right across the eye, as if something inside is trying to break out. Peppa doesn't look at it anymore, because each day the goat seems more three-dimensional, and one day it might take a real step.
Scary Peppa Pig episode that never aired. It was a Wednesday morning when Peppa and George discovered something was terribly wrong with their world. The episode begins with Peppa waking up to find that all the clocks in the house have stopped at exactly 3:33. The silence is deafening. No birds singing. No wind blowing. Just an eerie stillness. When Peppa goes downstairs, she finds Mummy Pig standing motionless in the kitchen, staring at the wall with a blank expression. Her eyes don't blink, and when Peppa calls her name, Mummy Pig's head turns with a mechanical clicking sound. Her smile is too wide, stretching beyond what should be possible, revealing rows of sharp teeth. George appears in the doorway, but something is wrong with his favorite dinosaur toy. Instead of its usual cheerful green color, it has turned a sickly black, and its plastic eyes seem to follow Peppa wherever she moves. When George tries to speak, only static comes out of his mouth, like a broken radio. Daddy Pig emerges from behind his newspaper, but the pages are completely blank except for one headline that reads, "They're watching," in dripping red letters. His glasses reflect not the room around them, but endless corridors filled with shadows that move independently. The family decides to visit Grandpa Pig's house, hoping to escape the strangeness, but the journey becomes a nightmare. The car radio plays the same nursery rhyme backwards, and the roads seem to stretch infinitely. Street signs point to places that don't exist. At Grandpa Pig's house, the garden has transformed into something unrecognizable. The vegetables have grown faces that whisper secrets in languages that hurt to hear. The flowers have wilted into shapes that look like tiny hands reaching up from graves. Grandpa Pig greets them with his usual warmth, but his shadow moves several seconds behind his actual movements. Inside the house, family photographs line the walls, but in every picture, there's an extra figure standing behind the family. A dark silhouette with glowing white eyes that seems to be getting closer with each frame. The television shows only snow, but shapes move within the static. As evening approaches, the whispers begin. They start as barely audible murmurs coming from inside the walls, but gradually grow louder. The voices belong to children, but they're speaking words that no child should know. Peppa realizes that they're not alone in the house. There are other versions of themselves from episodes that were never meant to be aired. These shadow versions watch from mirrors and reflections, their eyes hollow and their smiles twisted. The episode ends with Peppa understanding that there is no escape. The nightmare has become their reality, and somewhere in a television studio, the cameras are still rolling, broadcasting their terror to an audience that doesn't exist.